An economic crisis is plaguing the island nation Sri Lanka. Last night, hundreds of protesters tried to storm the house of the president. They gathered in front of the president's house, calling for his resignation. And before we tell you more, our correspondent, in fact, was present on scene last night, and here's what she witnessed on the ground firsthand in Colombo. Take a look.
It's a little past 11:30 here in Colombo, and the scenes you see right behind me is the road leading to the president's house, where what started off as a peaceful protest has now turned out to be really ugly and violent, as security forces have been drawn in. Tear gas has been fired several times, but yet people refuse to leave as they are demanding the president to step down immediately for leading this country into one of its worst economic crises the country has ever faced. And the people just do not seem to be going home just yet. They've been here outside the president's house as far as 6 p.m. this evening, and the protest only seems to be turning more and more ugly.
The protest was broken up by the police using tear gas and water cannons. Protesters dismantled a wall and hurled bricks at the police before setting a bus alight on a road leading to Gotabaya Rajapaksa's residence. Security forces even fired into the crowds, and at least one man was critically wounded. The capital was then placed under an indefinite curfew, which has now been lifted. At least 45 people have been arrested. The president's office also released a statement blaming extremist groups for these protests. The statement said, and I quote, "Many of those involved in the violence have been arrested, and many have been identified as organized extremists. They have spearheaded the protest calling for an Arab Spring in Sri Lanka." The anti-Rajapaksa sentiment is currently gaining momentum, so mediating in the conflict was Sri Lanka's Buddhist monks. A delegation of Buddhist monks visited President Rajapaksa earlier today. The Sri Lankan monks have been the supporters of the Rajapaksa brothers. Meanwhile, the Catholic bishops, political leaders to unite to save the country, and some of the bishops have warned that the island is fast becoming a failed state. Sri Lanka is facing its biggest economic crisis since independence. After months of economic hardship, the crisis has gone from bad to worse. Power cuts are common, fuel is very expensive, and ration lines are getting longer and longer. So how did things get so bad? It is a combination of many factors. Historically, Sri Lanka's governments have been weak when it comes to fiscal management. President Gotabaya was more of the same. His tax cuts were ill-timed, and so was his obsession with making Lankan agriculture 100% organic. And the final nail in the coffin was the pandemic, of course. Sri Lanka's tourism sector, which was its main source of earning. It accounts for over 10% of the nation's GDP. But the pandemic heavily impacted this sector, and tourist arrivals have now reduced in 2020 due to the restrictions naturally imposed on travel, causing the economy to shrink by as much as 3.6%. Dwindling foreign reserves have put pressure on the monetary system. The population of around 22 million is heavily dependent on imports. Most food products and essentials are imported in Sri Lanka, so to import food, Sri Lanka needs foreign currency reserves to pay for them. Currently, the foreign reserves are depleting at an alarming rate. In the last 2 years, Sri Lanka's foreign reserves have fallen 70%. Currently, Sri Lanka is focusing on debt restructuring to fight the crisis. This comes ahead of the IMF talks in Washington in April. Until now, they had resisted reaching out to the IMF. They preferred bilateral helplines. A $1.5 billion currency swap with China and a $1 billion credit line from India. This is because the president believes that the IMF will undermine Sri Lanka's sovereignty. But this has never stopped Colombo before. In the last 56 years, they have sought IMF relief 16 times, second only to Pakistan. WION World is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news updates on the move.